a startling public rebuke that has sent ripples through both political and business circles, former President Donald J. Trump declared that Elon Musk has lost his mind and announced that he does not intend to speak with the billionaire entrepreneur for quite some time. The remark was delivered with characteristic flourish during a live-streamed address on the 138th day of his second presumed administration, coming on the heels of Musk's pointed criticism of the administration's recently proposed federal spending bill. Trump's pronouncement, delivered from the opulent ballroom of his Mar-a-Lago estate, marked the latest salvo in what is quickly evolving into a very public rupture between two of America's most influential figures. From the outset, the tone of Trump's comments was unambiguous. He opened by recounting an earlier conversation with Musk, wherein the SpaceX and Tesla CEO had allegedly lambasted the multi-trillion-dollar appropriations package as an absolute disgrace, calling it, in Musk's words, a bankrupt display of congressional spending that does nothing to advance real progress for the American people. Trump, visibly agitated, responded that such invective was both uncalled for and counterproductive, describing it as the musings of a man who couldn't find his own rocket if it landed in his backyard. The former president went on to accuse Musk of abandoning the cooperative spirit that had characterized their business's earlier interactions, suggesting that the galactic-scale collaboration on space ventures and electrified transportation was being sacrificed at the altar of public grandstanding. Context for this explosive exchange dates to late March, when President Trump unveiled his highly anticipated Fiscal Stability Act, a sweeping legislative package aimed at curtailing runaway entitlement costs, boosting infrastructure investment, and streamlining regulation for emerging industries. The bill's drafters projected modest annual savings of $300 billion over 5 years, but critics in both parties decried it as filled with loopholes and temporary fixes that failed to address the nation's long-term debt trajectory. Musk, whose companies stand to benefit or suffer from the regulatory and tax provisions embedded in the act, took to social media shortly after the bill's unveiling to voice his objections. In a series of posts on the social network X, Musk condemned the legislation as a failed attempt at fiscal responsibility that would saddle future generations with unsustainable liabilities while doing little to stimulate real innovation. It was in response to these critiques that Trump took to the airwaves earlier this week. Speaking to a combined audience of MAGA loyalists and business community leaders, Trump characterized Musk's condemnation as not only wrong-headed, but deeply ungrateful. He reminded attendees of the substantial benefits his administration had extended to SpaceX, including expedited licensing approvals and tax credits under the former administration's space policy directives. He also alluded to personal interactions in which he claimed to have praised Musk's visionary leadership, only to see it repaid with nothing but insults. The crescendo of his remarks landed on the stark declaration, "Mr. Musk, you've lost your mind, and frankly, I don't plan to waste my time speaking with you for quite a long time." Adding an air of formal confirmation to the rupture, White House Chief of Staff Susie Wild issued a brief statement later that afternoon. In her remarks, Wild underscored that the administration had no current intentions of reopening dialogue with Musk or his representatives. "We recognize Mr. Musk's significant contributions to American industry and innovation," Wild acknowledged, "but at this juncture, given the tenor and content of his public statements, we see no path forward for constructive engagement. Until there is a clear demonstration of mutual respect, discussions will remain on hold." Her statement, terse and devoid of any conciliatory overtures, effectively cemented the public impression that relations between the ex-president and the tech mogul have reached a low point. Observers note that Trump's decision to make the dispute so public once again underscores his well-known strategy of utilizing high-profile feuds to command media attention and rally his base. For Musk, however, the stakes extend beyond mere publicity wars. The Tesla and SpaceX founder has long cultivated a reputation as a maverick entrepreneur who operates both inside and outside traditional political channels. His recent pivot towards more vocal engagement with policy debates, a shift from his earlier tendency to stay above partisan frays, has already drawn criticism from across the political spectrum. Now, With doors closed at the highest level of the former administration, Musk may face greater challenges in securing government contracts, landing favorable regulations, or even advancing his ambitious plans for Martian exploration and nationwide rollout of satellite internet. Despite the sobering tone of Trump's remarks and Wild's confirmation, some aides close to Musk remain optimistic that cooler heads might prevail. They point to the two men's history of transactional cooperation. Under Trump's previous administration, SpaceX secured numerous Department of Defense launch contracts and advanced the president's high-profile goal of re-establishing a human lunar presence. Musk's private network of Washington insiders, they argue, could yet facilitate a back-channel meeting to iron out differences, so long as Musk publicly recants his most caustic statements. Yet others warn that the rift may be deeper than a simple misunderstanding over spending priorities. Analysts suggest that Musk's growing identification with Silicon Valley's libertarian-leaning factions and Trump's emphasis on populist nationalism represent a fundamental divergence in worldviews, one that may prove irreconcilable without significant concessions from one side or the other. In the short term, the fallout has already begun to manifest in financial markets. Shares of Tesla dipped by nearly 4% in Thursday's trading session, while several of Musk's smaller ventures, particularly those still seeking fresh rounds of funding, have seen their valuations shaken as investors grow wary of potential regulatory headwinds. Meanwhile, political reaction has been swift. Legislative allies of Trump have voiced support for his stance, with Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene tweeting, "Elon Musk crossed the line when he insulted a sitting president's plan. He'll have to answer for that." On the other side of the aisle, several Democratic lawmakers seized the opportunity to cast the spat as an example of the perils of the so-called corporate capture of government, suggesting that both figures have historically leveraged each other's platforms for mutual gain. Regardless of how the situation unfolds, one fact remains clear. Two of the most influential figures shaping America's technological and political landscapes are now officially at odds. With Trump's statement rebuking Musk's criticisms and Wild's confirmation that further discussion is off the table, the relationship between the former president and the billionaire chief executive has entered uncharted territory. For the millions who follow both men's moves, be they investors, policy wonks, or casual observers, the coming weeks promise both intrigue and uncertainty. As the public digests today's bombshell announcement, all eyes will be on whether this breach will prove a temporary flare-up or the prelude to a more protracted power struggle. The history of the rupture between Donald Trump and Elon Musk is a tale of shifting alliances, convergent ambitions, and ultimately irreconcilable differences. It began innocuously enough in the months leading up to Trump's inauguration for a second term, when Musk, already one of the world's most prominent entrepreneurs, was quietly invited to join a newly conceived presidential advisory group focused on government efficiency. What started as private dinners in Palm Beach and discreet White House briefings soon evolved into the formal creation of the Department of Government Efficiency, an unprecedented fusion of Silicon Valley rapid iteration methods with the slow grind of federal bureaucracy. Trump, ever the deal-maker, saw in Musk's mind-bending innovations and data-driven zeal the perfect partner to help deliver on his signature promise to drain the swamp. Musk, for his part, relished the chance to apply startup culture to sprawling agencies, envisioning streamlined workflows, automated fraud detection, and a technocratic framework that would eclipse the cumbersome practices he frequently derided. Throughout the closing weeks of 2024, Musk's teams embedded themselves across key agencies. A handful of young engineers in the Social Security Administration's cubicle farms, a cadre of management consultants at the Department of Homeland Security, and even data scientists quietly mapping approval pipelines at the Environmental Protection Agency. They tested algorithms to flag improper payments, sketched prototypes of unified personnel databases, and assembled early drafts of kill switch tools designed to streamline program sunsetting. Trump, in public addresses and campaign fundraisers, began referring to Musk as a visionary partner whose involvement had already yielded billions in waste recovered and whose bold methods would save taxpayer dollars like nothing Washington has ever seen. Those sound bites lent legitimacy to Musk's growing influence in Washington, making him an object of fascination for Beltway elites and Silicon Valley insiders alike. Yet for all the fanfare, the arrangement was always delicate. Trump thrived on conflict and Musk thrived on disruption, but their motives did not always align. Where Musk saw opportunities to impose lean startup techniques on every corner of government, Trump saw photo ops and rallies. Musk pushed for pilot programs that would allow his teams unfettered access to agency data, arguing that comprehensive information was essential for identifying inefficiencies. Trump celebrated each efficiency report, but grew impatient with the slower pace of legislative negotiations needed to codify Musk's more sweeping reforms. Meanwhile, the sprawling One Big Beautiful Bill that Trump proposed in early 2025, an omnibus spending package designed to fund infrastructure, border security, and energy incentives, became the first true test of their collaboration. Musk's reaction to the bill reached a crescendo when, in a series of posts on his social media platform, he denounced the omnibus as an egregious demonstration of congressional profligacy, lambasting line items that he argued had no strategic value and would only add to the federal deficit. He singled out projects unrelated to the priorities he had been championing: pet project parks, redundant transportation studies, and earmarks for districts with little economic promise. His language was scathing, attacking the bill as anathema to good governance and warning that unchecked spending would undermine the United States' ability to invest in transformative technologies like reusable rockets and electric vehicle infrastructure. The comments, which echoed internal critiques he had aired only to top aides weeks before, struck Trump as a personal betrayal. After all, Musk had enjoyed access to the highest echelons of power, had courted his favor and loyalty, and had publicly lauded many of Trump's initiatives, until that moment. Within hours of Musk's posts going live, the Trump White House issued a terse statement questioning Musk's fidelity to the administration's broader agenda. Trump himself went further, characterizing Musk's criticisms as evidence that the entrepreneur had lost sight of the cooperative spirit that had driven their partnership. He warned that he would consider invoking clauses in the government contracts held by SpaceX and Tesla that would allow termination for public convenience, suggesting that those agreements could be jettisoned if Musk persisted in attacking the administration's flagship legislation. Overnight, what had been a symbiotic relationship devolved into an acrimonious standoff. Musk, ever the showman, escalated the feud by reposting a decade-old Trump tweet calling for fiscal responsibility, captioned simply, "Words to live by." The media spectacle that followed was nothing short of spectacular. Cable news panels dissected every nuance of Musk's critique and Trump's retort. Financial markets lurched as investors contemplated the possibility of contract cancellations, driving Tesla shares down almost double digits before a modest rebound fueled by rumors of back-channel negotiations. Meanwhile, Capitol Hill felt the tremors. Some Republican lawmakers seized Musk's language to press for even deeper cuts, weaponizing his critique in committee hearings to demand more aggressive entitlement reform. Others, more wary of antagonizing a major employer and innovator, counseled caution, warning that alienating Musk could hamper national security needs linked to SpaceX's launch capabilities and Starlink's satellite internet services. Behind closed doors, aides on both sides scrambled to avert a full-blown rupture. Musk's confidants floated the idea of a private summit at Mar-a-Lago, where the two principals could clear the air. Trump's team, recognizing the risks of a prolonged public spat, explored possible concessions, a joint press event praising SpaceX's national security role, or a statement emphasizing shared commitment to technological leadership. Yet both men remained stubbornly attached to their positions, Musk refusing to soften his stance on fiscal prudence, and Trump unwilling to tolerate public criticism of his legislative agenda. As the feud deepened, strategic analysts began to see the conflict as emblematic of a broader ideological chasm. Musk's techno-libertarian vision, one in which nimble corporate actors and data-driven entities would supplant traditional government functions, clashed with Trump's populist nationalism, which prioritized direct appeals to voters and skepticism toward elite institutions. Musk's reliance on algorithms and experimentation chilled warm relationships with some of Trump's congressional allies, who viewed data-driven governance as opaque and unaccountable. Conversely, Trump's readiness to wield executive power to reward or punish corporate actors unsettled many in Musk's circles, raising questions about the stability and predictability of public-private partnerships under an administration that prized personal loyalty above all. Over the next several weeks, the public saw additional skirmishes. Trump threatened to block SpaceX launches over regulatory disagreements. Musk retorted by redirecting Starlink's new capacity toward foreign disaster relief efforts, a move interpreted as a rebuke of the administration's insular policies. Susie Wild, the White House chief of staff, issued a statement confirming that formal communication channels with Musk were on hold until mutual respect could be reestablished. And yet, despite the ostensible freeze, informal couriers, former aides, mutual associates, and even lobbyists continued to shuttle between Palm Beach and Silicon Valley, seeking a path back to cooperation. By early summer of 2025, observers concluded that this chapter of the Trump-Musk saga was unlikely to be resolved quickly. The very attributes that had once made their alliance promising, Musk's relentless drive for efficiency and Trump's willingness to upend entrenched interests, now fueled their division. Both men, accustomed to influence on a near-cosmic scale, found themselves stymied by the inherent tensions between entrepreneurial disruption and political stewardship. Their quarrel came to symbolize the perils of entwining the highest levels of corporate innovation with the highest reaches of political power. Alliances formed in pursuit of bold ambitions can unravel just as spectacularly when core convictions collide. In the end, the feud underscored a timeless lesson about the limits of transactional relationships. Musk had entered the arena believing that his technological prowess and commitment to progress would transcend partisan divides. Trump presumed that his political capital and flair for spectacle would harness Musk's genius for the national good. Instead, their partnership unraveled under the weight of competing visions and unmet expectations, leaving both men to recalibrate their strategies and constituencies. As the dust settled, it became clear that the most powerful entrepreneur in the world and the most commanding political figure of his era had discovered the same truth. No alliance, however promising, is immune to the fault lines that emerge when innovation meets power. The Supreme Court's abrupt decision to restore the Department of Government Efficiency's unfettered access to Social Security Administration records marked a turning point in the struggle over privacy and administrative power. Without fanfare or detailed explanation, 6 justices in the majority quietly overturned a lower court's injunction, clearing the way for teams originally assembled by a private sector titan to dive deep into the personal files of tens of millions of Americans. Overnight, databases containing Social Security numbers, medical histories, disability determinations, and financial records once safeguarded by layers of regulation became available to operatives whose legal status rests on an executive order rather than congressional statute. The rapidity of the ruling surprised even seasoned observers, who likened the move to opening a vault without first installing locks or audit trails. In the weeks that preceded the High Court's intervention, the Department of Government Efficiency had chafed at what it saw as bureaucratic molasses impeding its fraud-fighting mission. Its leaders argued that every day spent unable to view unredacted data meant more dollars lost to improperly paid benefits and unchecked waste. They painted themselves as patriotic troubleshooters, summoned to rescue an aging agency mired in outdated technology and sprawling backlogs. Yet critics cautioned that unchecked access to highly sensitive files represented an invitation to mission creep, and that the absence of statutory guardrails could transform a time-limited pilot project into a permanent power center wielding unprecedented influence over individual citizens. The initial district court decision to block access had rested on concrete privacy concerns. A federal judge pointed to the Privacy Act's clear mandate that agencies may not disclose or maintain records without strict compliance with notice and comment requirements and a demonstrable link to authorized purposes. The SSA's own internal policies barred outside entities from receiving personally identifiable information without robust safeguards. In granting the injunction, the lower court underscored the risk that data intended to detect fraud could be repurposed for other ends, whether political targeting, unauthorized surveillance, or commercial exploitation. That holding represented a narrow but important assertion of judicial oversight in an era of expanding executive prerogative. Despite the injunction, the administration pressed forward with an emergency appeal, invoking the dire need to curtail billions in annual improper payments. The Supreme Court's order cursorily echoed those urgencies, suggesting that any delay in access would inflict irreparable harm on the government's ability to police its own coffers. Yet nowhere in the public order did the justices explicate any technical safeguards or oversight protocols to accompany the ruling. There was no requirement for data minimization, no specification of retention limits, and no clarity on who within the task force would bear ultimate responsibility for data stewardship. In effect, the ruling treated the Department of Government Efficiency as a branch of government unto itself, exempt from the normal transparency demands to which federal agencies are answerable. In practice, the reinstated access has already yielded a torrent of raw data flowing into the new agency's servers. Teams of analysts and software engineers have begun constructing dashboards that map benefit disbursement trends by geography and demographic group, ostensibly to flag anomalies, requiring further scrutiny. Behind the glow of monitor screens, some staffers gloat at the efficiency gains, boasting in internal forums that they can now trace individual case files from origination to payment in a matter of clicks. To proponents, such capabilities represent the dawn of a rationalized government, one that leverages modern tools to root out long-standing abuses. Yet to privacy advocates, the specter of life-cycle monitoring of citizens' interactions with government services raises chilling questions about the boundaries of state power. When pressed about the absence of additional safeguards, the administration has offered only vague assurances. Officials point to high-level pledges that data will be used solely for fraud detection and program evaluation, but they stop short of binding protocols. There is no independent oversight board, no mandatory reporting to Congress, and no publicly accessible audit logs. Employees of the Social Security Administration, meanwhile, express mixed feelings. Some career officials welcome the promise of long-overdue technological upgrades, while others remain uneasy about ceding control of their systems to an entity beyond their supervisory chain. Union representatives have threatened to file new lawsuits if key provisions of agency privacy policy are overridden without proper consultation. Beyond the immediate data privacy stakes, the broader institutional impact is profound. By treating an office born of executive fiat as functionally equivalent to a statutorily created agency, the ruling erodes Congress's power of the purse and its role in establishing and delimiting government bodies. Future administrations may be emboldened to deploy similar private sector-style task forces across other agencies, banking on emergency appeals to circumvent legislative procedures. The judicial imprimatur conferred here offers a template for bypassing the Administrative Procedure Act's notice and comment rulemaking or the Appointments Clause's advice and consent requirements. In effect, the balance of administrative law tilts further toward rapid unilateral executive action and away from deliberative processes designed to ensure accountability and public input. Nor are the privacy implications confined to the Social Security system. The task force's architects have already signaled interest in expanding their reach into other benefits programs, from Medicare and Medicaid to veterans' pensions. Each new data integration amplifies the potential for profiling and automated decision-making far beyond the original mission. Imagine a scenario in which an algorithm flags a beneficiary's bank account for unusual deposits, prompting a freeze on benefits pending manual review. Or consider the prospect of cross-referencing medical records with employment histories to identify suspected malingerers. While fraud is undeniably a problem, many experts argue that heavy-handed surveillance approaches risk punishing innocent claimants and undermining trust in essential social supports. In Congress, legislators on both sides of the aisle have voiced alarm. Some Republicans decry the judicial interference with executive authority, but many also worry about the lack of safeguards. A bipartisan group of senators has begun drafting legislation that would require any task force with shared data access to adhere to the same transparency and rulemaking that govern permanent agencies. Provisions under consideration include mandatory privacy impact assessments, annual independent audits, and clear sunset clauses to guarantee that temporary bodies do not calcify into permanent shadows of executive power. Democrats, for their part, frame the Supreme Court's decision as a dangerous overreach that threatens fundamental civil liberties and insist on robust statutory protections before any further expansion of authority. Legal scholars emphasize that the battle unfolding over data access may tip the balance in future debates over executive-legislative relations. If the executive branch can routinely invoke emergency appeals to secure unprecedented powers that Congress never deliberated or approved, then the constitutional design of checks and balances risks being hollowed out. Be the Ralph. Supreme Court's willingness to intervene at the administration's behest, without demanding accompanying guardrails, signals an institutional realignment in which privacy and procedural rigor take a back seat to expedient outcomes. Whether that realignment endures may depend on pending lower court decisions and potential legislative pushback, but for now, the teeth of statutory privacy laws lie blunted. As litigation winds its way through the appellate system, the next few months will be critical. The Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals must decide whether the Supreme Court's emergency ruling was a one-off response to extraordinary circumstances or a signal that future injunctions against executive initiatives will likewise be short-lived. Meanwhile, public interest groups are preparing to escalate their challenges, seeking injunctions on the grounds that the Supreme Court's order exceeded its jurisdiction by failing to provide necessary procedural protections. Should the appeals court impose tighter conditions, demanding data sorting, limited retention, or ongoing judicial oversight, it could rein in the worst excesses of the task force model and reaffirm the primacy of statutory rulemaking. Yet, even if the Department of Government Efficiency ultimately loses its claim to unbridled data access, the damage may linger. The infrastructure and access credentials remain in place, the personnel are acclimated to their new privileges, and the expectation of rapid data-driven governance has taken root. Rolling back these gains will prove politically and technically complex, especially if agency systems have been reconfigured around the task force's methodologies. In the end, the Supreme Court's unguarded grant of access may mark a permanent shift in the contours of American administrative practice, one in which privacy protections yield to efficiency mandates and temporary expedients too easily become permanent fixtures of government. Republican lawmakers reacted to the Trump-Musk rupture with a swift and unmistakable rally around the former president, emphasizing party unity over deference to a billionaire critic. On the House floor, members from both moderates and staunch conservatives echoed similar talking points. Donald Trump's leadership commands the GOP agenda, and any deviation inspired by an unappointed corporate executive threatens to undermine the will of the voters. In private meetings, senior Republicans dismissed Elon Musk's fiscal alarm as tactical noise, arguing that his perspective was inherently self-interested and disconnected from the broader responsibilities of governance. Among rank-and-file members, a prevailing sentiment emerged that Musk had overstepped the bounds of responsible civic engagement, crossing a line that separated thoughtful policy counsel from unwarranted meddling in democratic processes. Even as the leadership embraced unity, a subset of fiscal hawks seized upon Musk's critique of the omnibus spending bill to press for deeper cuts. Representatives known for their uncompromising stances on entitlement reform began quoting Musk's language, pork-laden, deficit-driven, shortchanging future generations, to justify their demands for leaner appropriations. Their strategy was twofold: leverage Musk's business-savvy reputation to bolster calls for austerity, while preserving enough distance to avoid appearing subservient to an external power center. This maneuver created a delicate dynamic in conference. Strategy sessions, as whip counts indicated that a handful of votes could be swayed by the promise of more stringent spending reductions. Yet to avoid an open rebellion, party leaders floated compromises, trimming specific programs but preserving headline items that undergirded key constituencies. Behind the scenes, GOP strategists grappled with the optics of embracing Musk's fiscal arguments without endorsing his broader political posture. Polling indicated that while conservative primary voters were largely unmoved by Musk's pronouncements, moderate Republicans and independents viewed his intervention as a sign of business overreach. Survey data suggested a near-even split among registered Republicans on whether Musk's influence on federal policy was too great. This ambivalence concerned consultants who worried that a hard turn toward Musk-inspired austerity might alienate suburban districts where voters prized pragmatic solutions over ideological purity. As a result, messaging adopted a cautious tone, borrowing Musk's fiscal critiques selectively while highlighting Trump's own record of vetoes and budgetary discipline. News outlets tracked the fallout with keen attention to its market implications. Tesla shares, which had been trading near all-time highs, suddenly lurched downward on the morning after Musk's social media diatribe. A 12% drop in intraday trading wiped tens of billions off Tesla's market capitalization, reflecting investor anxiety over potential regulatory reprisals and canceled SpaceX contracts. Commentary in financial journals speculated that the administration could throttle Tesla's federal electric vehicle tax credit or subject Starlink's spectrum licenses to renewed scrutiny. By midweek, however, Tesla had clawed back some losses as rumors surfaced of quiet phone calls between Musk and senior administration aides, an implicit acknowledgement that both sides might prefer a muted détente over a prolonged standoff. Musk's public favorability ratings also took a measurable hit in the immediate aftermath. Independent polls tracking business leaders' approval showed a 5-point drop in positive sentiment, with respondents citing concerns about his unpredictable forays into partisan disputes. In focus groups among suburban swing voters, many participants expressed fatigue with billionaire figures who appeared to wield disproportionate influence in Washington. Some respondents who had praised Musk's achievements in space and clean energy lamented his recent political volatility, questioning whether he still embodied the innovative maverick of yesteryear or had morphed into a polarizing ideologue. In social media discourse, hashtags calling for Musk to mind his own business trended briefly, capturing a wider cultural impatience with tech titans who venture beyond their core competencies. Expert commentary reinforced the narrative of Musk's growing isolation within conservative circles. Veteran analysts pointed out that corporate leaders who once enjoyed bipartisan respect now find themselves collateral casualties in culture war skirmishes. In op-eds running in major newspapers, commentators lamented that the Musk-Trump split exemplified a dangerous precedent. CEOs who publicly criticize government policy risk, jeopardizing the very partnerships that drive innovation. Legal scholars warned that Trump's threats to invoke contract termination clauses against SpaceX and Tesla signaled an erosion of contractual stability, potentially deterring other companies from collaborating with the federal government. This legal unpredictability, they argued, could chill investment in critical technologies, from satellite internet to electric transportation. Still, some voices cautioned against writing off Musk's long-term influence. A handful of GOP elder statesmen noted that past administrations had taken on corporate titans only to later seek their expertise when political winds shifted. They argued that Musk's deep ties to Pentagon contracts and NASA's Artemis program rendered him too strategically valuable to be permanently sidelined. Should national emergencies or high-stakes space ventures arise, they suggested, pragmatism would likely trump principle, drawing Musk back into room-temperature discussions with senior officials. Thus, while Musk's sway over immediate legislative battles had waned, his cachet within national security and scientific circles remained substantial. Public relations experts observed that the Trump administration has long used high-profile feuds to dominate news cycles, and the Musk confrontation fit that pattern. By casting Musk as a rogue actor whose criticisms threatened national interests, Trump not only deflected scrutiny from other policy challenges, but also reinforced his own image as defender of the people against overreaching elites. For his part, Musk's response, circuit riding on social media outrage, underscored the limitations of digital platforms as substitutes for steady, behind-the-scenes diplomacy. In this light, the feud offered a cautionary tale about the perils of air raid-style communications in high-stakes policy arenas, where sit-down negotiations often yield more durable outcomes than viral posturing. In the days following the public exchange, congressional aides reported an uptick in requests for confidentiality from members seeking to distance themselves from both camps. Such lawmakers found themselves walking a rhetorical tightrope, acknowledging Trump's authority while privately voicing frustration at the brinkmanship that threatened to derail essential appropriations. On Capitol Hill, nonpartisan staffers quietly drafted alternative budget scenarios that pared back spending to levels both fiscally responsible and politically tenable, seeking to chart a middle course that neither pandered to Musk's hardline demands nor fully embraced Trump's omnibus priorities. Their work highlighted the operational complexities of governing amid high-decibel personality clashes. As the legislative session pressed on, the Trump-Musk feud became less about headline-grabbing insults and more about its substantive aftereffects on policy and governance. Republicans maintained a united front in public, but internal memos revealed lingering doubts about the wisdom of allowing personal rivalries to shape national budgets. Meanwhile, Musk's companies recalibrated their strategic priorities, shoring up domestic production lines and diversifying international partnerships to hedge against potential U.S. political volatility. For observers, the episode crystallized a timeless truth. The alignment of political and corporate interests is inherently fragile, susceptible to rupture when strategic imperatives give way to personal grievances and ideological discord. In that sense, the Trump-Musk confrontation stands as a modern parable of alliance ambition and the enduring challenge of reconciling power with principle. The Department of Government Efficiency, born of Elon Musk's initial foray into federal reform and sustained by an executive order rather than statute, has proven more durable than many anticipated. Even after Musk's public break with the administration, the teams he helped assemble remained deeply embedded within the machinery of government, wielding unprecedented authority over critical agency processes. Across the corridors of the Social Security Administration, IRS, Homeland Security, and beyond, small squads of DOGE operatives have quietly taken control of data pipelines, program audits, and personnel decisions, effectively blurring the line between a temporary task force and a permanent administrative branch. In office buildings from Washington to regional SSA centers, ordinary civil servants now find themselves reporting to managers appointed not through the customary civil service channels, but via letters bearing the DOGE insignia, an emblem originally intended to symbolize rapid innovation that now marks an enduring power center in the executive branch. The recruitment efforts behind DOGE have been nothing short of aggressive. Advertisements on LinkedIn and in industry newsletters boast salaries well above GS-15 pay scales, luring talent from Silicon Valley, boutique consulting firms, and even private intelligence organizations. These recruits bring expertise in data, engineering, machine learning, and organizational design, skills once rare in the federal workforce but suddenly in demand for the mission of uncovering inefficiencies across sprawling programs. To entice veterans of government service, DOGE has dangled retention bonuses and fast-track promotion pathways, promising that those who demonstrate the tenacity to kill redundant processes will be core members of a new breed of public sector elite. The upshot is a hybrid workforce that straddles the public-private divide. Career bureaucrats seconded into the task force, high-paid contract specialists, and even political appointees whose roles extend far beyond the usual tenure of white House offices. On any given day, DOGE teams exercise broad discretion over hiring freezes, internal reorganizations, and budgetary reallocations. By default, any program flagged as underperforming faces an automated review under DOGE's proprietary efficiency index, with little opportunity for agency heads to appeal. The index itself is a black box to most government lawyers, who have filed Freedom of Information Act requests seeking the algorithm's parameters and weightings. In response, the administration has claimed that revealing the full methodology would compromise sensitive data security protocols. Consequently, dozens of federal programs, ranging from vocational rehabilitation services to regional transit grants, have been terminated or merged based on opaque efficiency scores, leaving communities scrambling to understand why long-standing initiatives suddenly lost funding. Within agencies, the phenomenon of Dodgeification has become a shorthand among career staff for the ways in which the task force's presence has transformed work culture. Weekday town halls convened by Doge leaders emphasize data points over tradition, urging mid-level managers to abandon familiar bureaucratic procedures in favor of nimble, tech-driven workflows. Some employees welcome the clarity of performance metrics, noting that it inspires urgency and innovation. Others bristle at the constant surveillance. Internal chat logs and email correspondence are analyzed by sentiment analysis software, generating risk scores for individual employees. Those deemed insufficiently aligned with Doge's mission risk sudden reassignment, demotion, or even termination, actions that bypass the typical protections guaranteed by civil service rules. The scope of Doge's influence extends beyond internal processes to strategic policy decisions. In budgetary negotiations, agency chiefs report that Doge representatives now sit at the table as full participants, challenging line-item justifications and lobbying for reallocations that reflect the task force's priorities. When environmental programs are trimmed or workforce training grants are redirected toward technology pilots, Doge can claim that these are evidence-based adjustments designed to maximize return on taxpayer investment. The result is a shifting policy landscape in which external actors, initially conceived as temporary advisors, now help set the very contours of federal spending, shifting power away from elected legislators and career experts alike. Doge's alignment with the broader conservative agenda codified in Project 2025 has only reinforced its staying power. Many of its reforms echo the blueprint championed by right-wing advocacy groups: reduction of civil service protections, expansion of political appointee roles, and a preference for privatization or public-private partnerships. Indeed, several Doge leaders have taken part in closed-door strategy sessions alongside architects of Project 2025, ensuring that the task force's work dovetails seamlessly with longer-term efforts to reshape the federal government. Cabinet secretaries appointed during this period have often been chosen for their willingness to collaborate with Doge, underscoring the extent to which the task force's philosophy has permeated the upper echelons of the administration. Legally, Doge continues to navigate a minefield of challenges and inquiries. Unions representing SSA workers filed suit within weeks of the emergency Supreme Court ruling that restored the task force's data access, arguing that the executive order exceeded constitutional bounds and violated the Privacy Act. Meanwhile, a bipartisan group of senators has introduced legislation that would require any similar task force to adhere to the Administrative Procedure Act's rulemaking procedures and to submit to congressional oversight committees. To date, these efforts have stalled in committee, unable to muster the supermajority needed to override procedural roadblocks. In the absence of new statutes, Doge operates under the implicit precedent that courts and Congress will be reluctant to dismantle a body whose work is portrayed as indispensable to safeguarding the nation's fiscal health. The nuanced relationship between Doge and traditional agencies is nowhere more apparent than in the realm of cybersecurity. By integrating its own authentication protocols with agency IT infrastructures, Doge has inserted what some defenders call a vital security layer against external threats. Critics, however, warn that granting an outside task force such deep system privileges creates a single point of failure. If Doge's credentials were ever compromised, attackers could gain sweeping control over core government databases. Internal memos leaked by whistleblowers suggest that some SSA staffers have flagged these concerns to agency leadership, only to be told that Doge's access is non-negotiable, an executive mandate above all. Despite the controversies, Doge continues to expand its remit. Conversations are underway to embed Doge analysts in the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, and even in the Office of Management and Budget itself. Talks with the Department of Education envision pilot programs to use machine learning models to predict student loan default rates and to dynamically adjust repayment plans, a prospect that thrills policymakers eager to reduce delinquency, but worries consumer advocates who fear algorithmic bias. Across agencies, the message from the task force is consistent. Data-driven governance is the future, and those who resist are standing in the way of a leaner, more accountable government. Summer 2025 unfolds. It is clear that Doge's footprint will endure long after any single administration. The task force's rapid institutionalization serves as a case study in how executive-level enthusiasm, corporate-style branding, and legal maneuvering can transform a temporary advisory body into a quasi-permanent pillar of the federal state. For tens of millions of Americans who interact with Social Security, Medicare, and other affected programs, the changes will manifest in faster decisions, fewer redundancies, but also in diminished avenues for redress or appeals. Whether the trade-offs between efficiency and accountability will ultimately yield a net benefit remains an open question. But few dispute that, thanks to Musk's initial vision and the administration's unwavering support, the Department of Government Efficiency has achieved a level of persistence and power once deemed impossible. In the days following his public break with Donald Trump, Elon Musk found himself entangled in a fresh volley of criticism, this time directed squarely at Steve Bannon, the once influential architect of the MAGA movement. Musk's rebuke, delivered in a blistering post on his social media platform, accused Bannon of fomenting division and attempting to weaponize national security mechanisms against a private company. Bannon, never one to shy away from confrontation, struck back by labeling Musk an out-of-touch billionaire whose allegiance to free markets was undermining the populist revolt against corporate elites. What began as a spat over fiscal policy soon became a full-blown spectacle of ideological posturing, setting the stage for a deeper rift within the conservative coalition. This emerging split revealed two distinct strains of right-wing thought vying for dominance. On one side, Musk's vision of a technocratic governance model led by agile, data-driven enterprises, and on the other, Bannon's insistence on a grassroots majoritarian approach that prized the direct will of voters over elite managerial expertise. Musk, drawing on his tenure at the Department of Government Efficiency, argued that only through the rigorous application of performance metrics and algorithmic analysis could government inefficiencies be tamed. He painted a picture of state functions streamlined under the stewardship of CEOs and industry specialists, an American administrative state reimagined in the mold of a lean startup. Bannon, by contrast, decried this CEO rule as antithetical to democratic principles, warning that handing too much authority to corporate leaders risked creating an unaccountable oligarchy. He framed his critique in populist terms, urging supporters to reclaim power from faceless technocrats and return it to the forgotten men and women of the heartland. As the Musk-Bannon feud escalated, pundits and party strategists began weighing the implications for the 2026 midterm elections. Some operatives predicted that the public fight could fragment the GOP's base, with pro-Musk moderates and Silicon Valley sympathizers at odds with hardline populists in rural and working-class districts. Others argued that the spectacle might serve as a controlled release valve, channeling intra-party tensions into a high-profile debate without necessarily translating into electoral losses. Fundraisers on both sides seized on the drama. Technophile donors wrote checks to pro-Musk political action committees aimed at advancing tech-friendly candidates, while Bannon-aligned groups marshaled grassroots volunteers for door-to-door campaigns, emphasizing economic nationalism. In boardrooms and backrooms alike, the consensus was that the right would need to reconcile these factions or risk ceding seats to Democrats, capitalizing on a divided opposition. Behind the public sparring, a series of private overtures underscored the pragmatism running beneath the surface. Senior White House aides, concerned about the prospect of further alienating a key defense contractor, quietly explored ways to blunt Bannon's calls for punitive measures against SpaceX. At the same time, Musk's advisors floated the idea of drafting a joint op-ed, one that would celebrate shared goals like renewable energy development and space exploration while skirting contentious budget debates. Neither initiative gained much traction. Musk remained adamant in his fiscal critiques, and Bannon refused to entertain any olive branch from a figure he saw as emblematic of the outsider elite. The impasse illustrated the inherent tension between ideological purity and strategic compromise, a dynamic that could shape the right's policymaking long after the headlines faded. Analysts also noted that the feud risked reshaping alliances throughout the broader conservative ecosystem. Think tanks and policy institutes found themselves under pressure to choose sides, with some, traditionally close to Musk, publishing papers extolling the merits of performance-based budgeting, while others, aligned with Bannon's nationalist network, doubled down on populist rhetoric and opposition to globalist trade deals. Republican members of Congress felt the pinch most acutely. Many had relied on Musk's endorsement and donations in previous cycles, only to confront constituents energized by Bannon's anti-establishment message. Town halls grew more contentious, as voters demanded clarity on whether their representatives backed corporate-led efficiency initiatives or the populist economic agenda that had propelled Trump to power. Looking forward, several potential scenarios emerged. In one, a narrowly averted rapprochement could unfold. Pragmatism might prevail as both Musk and key MAGA figures recognized the mutual benefits of cooperation, leading to behind-the-scenes arrangements that preserved SpaceX contracts while affording Musk a more measured public role. In another, Musk's isolation could deepen, pushing him toward establishing independent political platforms or third-party vehicles designed to champion a corporate tech-centric vision of conservatism. Such a development risked siphoning off contributions and volunteers from mainstream Republican campaigns, potentially altering the calculus of close races. A third possibility envisioned the populist faction ultimately marginalizing Musk, elevating Bannon's brand of economic nationalism as the defining pillar of future GOP strategies, and relegating free market technocrats to a secondary status. Beyond the immediate electoral ramifications, the Musk-Bannon conflict raised profound questions about the evolving relationship between technology and democratic governance. As corporate leaders increasingly step into policy arenas, whether through advisory roles, public commentary, or philanthropic initiatives, the interplay between private sector innovation and public accountability has grown more complex. Musk's challenge to Bannon's populism underscored the seductive appeal of algorithmic solutions to social problems, while Bannon's counters highlighted the risk of concentrating power outside the electoral process. Observers warned that unchecked alliances between politicians and entrepreneurs could erode institutional safeguards, blurring lines between regulatory oversight and corporate interests. By mid-2025, it became clear that the right was at a crossroads. The question was no longer merely who would control the GOP's hashtag trends or donor lists, but what foundational principles would guide conservative governance in the years ahead. Would the party embrace a model that fused managerial efficiency with popular sovereignty, or would it recommit to a populism that viewed corporate power with deep suspicion? The outcome would reverberate far beyond the next election cycle, shaping debates over privacy and data use, the scope of executive authority, and the very character of American democracy. As both camps entrenched their positions, the only certainty was that the Musk-Bannon showdown had inaugurated a new era of ideological contestation, one whose resolution would determine not just the fate of two men, but the direction of a movement and the future of the nation.